Kendall Price was 40 years old when his wife opened the front door of their house in Richmond, Virginia, heaved 2 rolling suitcases and a duffel bag onto the wet lawn in the middle of a Thursday afternoon rainstorm, told him he could keep the clothes and leave the rest, and stood in the doorway with her arms folded in the posture of a woman who had done her calculations and was satisfied with the arithmetic. She had not calculated all of the variables. He drove a 7-year-old Tahoe with a cracked coat hook and a construction site parking pass still on the windshield from a project visit 2 years ago he had never bothered to clear. Vanessa's circle described him to anyone who asked as in energy the way people described a thing they had stopped being curious about. She had spent 6 years sleeping next to a man she had fully understood by the second month of knowing him, or so she had decided. She had moved $19,000 from their joint savings into an account she believed was untraceable. She had retained an attorney for 4 months before telling him anything. She had timed the Thursday confrontation because she knew he had a site visit scheduled. She did not know what he had arranged to get to that site visit. 3 seconds after the bags hit the grass, the sound arrived. A low, purposeful thrum that climbed out of the gray sky and resolved into the visible fact of a helicopter descending over the tree line at the edge of the property, settling into the open front yard in the unhurried manner of something that had been scheduled and was arriving exactly on time. Vanessa stepped forward from the doorway. She looked at the helicopter. She looked at Kendall. She looked at the bags between them on the wet lawn. Highline Energy Partners had 19 active solar and wind installations across 6 states, a project development pipeline valued at $180 million, and a logo on the helicopter fuselage in dark blue on white that matched the framed aerial photograph that had been hanging in Kendall's home office for 3 years. She had absolutely no idea. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning light came through the home office on Bellevue Avenue at a long slant in the early hours, landing on the white oak desk that had belonged to Kendall's grandfather, a retired master electrician named Harold Price, who had spent 40 years in the trades and had left the desk, his tools, and a set of principles about careful work to the people he trusted to carry them forward. The desk had a scratch in the lower left corner from a move in 2017. Kendall had never repaired it. Things worn by use told a truer story than things kept perfect. He worked in renewable energy project development, had been in the field since 27, starting as a site assessment analyst at a mid-sized solar firm in Northern Virginia, learning the mechanics of grid interconnection, land acquisition, permitting, and project financing, the long invisible foundations that preceded any visible installation by years and sometimes decades. The work required patience of a specific kind, the patience of a person who understood that the value was in what you had built before anyone could see it. At 32, he had left to found Highline Energy Partners, a project development and acquisition firm that identified sites, navigated the full permitting and interconnection process, and developed projects to construction readiness, the stage where the real value emerged. He had taken on 2 equity partners in 2018, bought one out in 2022, and now ran a company of 31 people that had closed 14 project sales and had 19 installations in active operation across Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, and Alabama. Nobody he had drinks with on a Friday evening knew the full scope of it. That had always been intentional. The helicopter was the most visible piece of it. A Bell 407 leased through Highline's operations arm, used primarily for site surveys on large acreage installations where ground-level assessment missed what the aerial view revealed. It landed at helipads and grass strips and open farm fields across 6 states, and Kendall had logged more hours in it than he sometimes remembered to count. It was a working tool. He had never mentioned it at dinner. His grandmother, Clara Price, had raised him in a house in Chesterfield County after his parents' schedules required it. And she had told him once when he was 12, watching him rewire a lamp with his grandfather's tools, "Don't argue with small thinking, Kendall. Just keep building." She had passed 3 years ago, and her photograph sat on the corner of the oak desk between a project binder and a framed photograph of the Southside, Virginia installation, 40 megawatts, aerial view, taken from the Highline helicopter during a 2021 site review. He had met Vanessa at a professional networking event in the Fan District in 2018. She was a project manager at a commercial interior design firm, precise and composed and comfortable in professional rooms in the way of someone who had studied the mechanics of those rooms and applied what she learned. He had appreciated her competence. He had come to understand, over time, that competence in presentation and competence in honesty were different skills that sometimes resided in the same person and sometimes decisively did not. They married in 2019. He renovated the kitchen on Bellevue Avenue, replaced the floors in the study over a long weekend in October, built out the home office himself over 3 Saturdays. Vanessa decorated the shared rooms with the deliberate care of someone who understood what visible things said about the people who lived among them. The house was well maintained and considered. His home office was full of project documentation, grid interconnection maps, geological surveys, and the framed aerial photograph of the Southside installation, 40 megawatts. Clear sky, the helicopter's shadow visible at the edge of the frame, that Vanessa had described to a dinner guest once as some solar thing Kendall does for work. She was not wrong about the category. She had not asked about the scope. It was the fall of 2024 when he began to notice the specific pattern he recognized from years of project due diligence as the preparation phase of a structured exit. Don't argue with small thinking. Just keep building. He spent 4 weeks watching before he moved. The signals were not dramatic. They were the kind of thing a person trained to assess the status of a development project learned to read in other contexts. 3 evenings when she was on her phone in the bedroom with the door closed and her voice low and consistent, which was different from the variable cadence of a normal conversation. A Tuesday when she came home 90 minutes past her usual time with an explanation prepared in advance. A weekend when she suggested he take a site visit he had been planning to postpone, and he recognized the particular shape of a calendar being managed. He pulled the joint bank records and read them the way he read a project's financial model, looking for the pattern before drawing conclusions. $19,000 out across 5 months, in amounts designed to pass beneath casual notice, routed to an account that resolved through a business registry search to a limited liability company in Henrico County with a single registered agent, Derek Kane, a residential contractor with a Virginia license issued 2 years prior, and 2 unresolved client complaints from homeowners who alleged substandard work on kitchen remodels. He photographed the records. He cross-referenced dates against his own calendar, every withdrawal against a week, every week against his own travel log. He printed the bank summary and the registry results and the licensing record and placed them in a project file he named Bellevue. He did this the same evening he found the first transfer, at the oak desk, in the home office, with Clara's photograph on the corner and the aerial view of the Southside installation on the wall. He built the picture from the outside in, the way he always built pictures, before drawing a single conclusion. His face remained perfectly calm throughout. He met with Patricia Rhodes, a family law attorney on Gray Street in Richmond. He had retained 3 years prior to re-verify the prenuptial protections when Highline's valuation had increased significantly, and he had wanted the documentation current. He placed the full Bellevue file on her conference table on a Wednesday morning. She reviewed the prenuptial agreement, the bank records, the entity search results, and the Highline valuation summary without speaking for 35 minutes. When she finished, she set her reading glasses on the table. "The prenuptial agreement is sound," she said. "Highline Energy Partners is explicitly listed as a premarital asset on Schedule A. Founded 2012, married 2019, the timeline is clear and the documentation is complete. She has no claim on the company regardless of how her attorney frames the filing. She's been consulting with an attorney for at least 4 months," Kendall said. "Based on the transfer timeline, probably longer." Patricia looked at the Highline valuation summary. Does she know what the company is worth? Kendall thought about 6 years of quarterly reports that had arrived at his office address. He thought about the framed aerial photograph in his home office that Vanessa had passed every day for 5 years without reading the installation name on the nameplate below it. "She knows I work in renewable energy," he said. "She has never asked more than that." Patricia wrote something on her legal pad. Then when the financial disclosure lands in her attorney's office, they will have a very different morning than they are planning for. She had no idea that the patient, methodical man she had decided she understood, had spent 12 years building one of the most productive mid-size renewable energy development firms in the Southeast. He drove that Saturday to his Uncle Bertram's house in Northside Richmond. His father's older brother, 66, retired master electrician, a man who had spent 30 years reading current and load and the particular language of systems under stress, and who communicated primarily in the language of what held and what did not. Bertram had taught Kendall to read a circuit diagram at 13, to pull wire without shortcuts at 15, and to price a job honestly at 17. 3 lessons that had shaped the way Kendall approached everything that followed. Bertram met him in the driveway with 2 cups of coffee and the quiet certainty of a man who had been expecting a version of this conversation for some time. They sat on the back porch, and Kendall told him the full shape of it. The transfers, the LLC, Derek Kane, Patricia, the prenuptial, the Thursday site visit, all of it. Bertram was quiet for a long time. He drank his coffee and looked at the garden. "She never asked what you built," he said. "No, 6 years." "Yes," Bertram looked at the yard for another moment. "Your grandfather used to say that the people who don't ask questions have already made up their minds about the answers. Saves time early. Costs them more later." He looked at Kendall directly. "You already know what you need to do. I do. Then do it clean. No anger. Let what you built say what it says." By the following Thursday, Patricia's team had added 3 items to the Bellevue file. The first was a verification of Derek Kane's LLC formation date, incorporated 14 months prior. 2 months before Vanessa had attended a renovation consultation at a neighbor's house where Kane's crew was working. The second was a summary of the prior complaints against Kane's contracting license, which had now been joined by a third from a separate Henrico County homeowner. The third was a notation that Vanessa's attorney had filed a preliminary asset inquiry with the Virginia court system 6 weeks earlier, 4 months into their consultations, which had been flagged automatically when Patricia ran a standard search against Kendall's name. He read the additions in the home office on a Wednesday evening, noted everything, and closed the file. Kendall came home the following evening and made dinner and sat across from Vanessa and asked about a project her firm was managing in Scott's Addition. She gave him an answer that was present and managed, and he listened to all of it with the full attention he had always given her. He cleared the table. He washed the dishes. He went to the home office and sat at his grandfather's desk and looked at the aerial photograph on the wall, the south side installation, the helicopter's shadow just visible at the edge of the frame, and thought about the site visit in 2 days and the bag he would pack the night before. He was ready. He had been ready for longer than Thursday. Preparation was not prediction. It was discipline. The confrontation happened Thursday morning at 7:15. Kendall had come downstairs to find Vanessa at the kitchen table with a folder open. One of the Highline board meeting summaries from 2023 she must have found in the home office at some point, which included a portfolio table listing the company's asset base and the projected development pipeline. She had read enough of it to have specific numbers in her head and a version of confidence she had assembled on those numbers over several weeks. She told him the company was a marital asset. She told him her attorney had been building the case for months. She told him he had been hiding the scale of his business from her for the entire marriage. He waited until she was finished. Then he waited one moment more. Highline was incorporated in 2012, he said. We married in 2019. You signed a prenuptial agreement that lists the company by name and current valuation on Schedule A. The documentation is complete. Patricia Rhodes is my attorney. Have your attorney call her. Vanessa looked at him with the expression of a woman whose argument has met a wall she had not known was there. She told him he could get his things and go. He nodded once. He had packed the bag the night before. He went upstairs and retrieved it, came downstairs, and added the 2 rolling cases from the bedroom closet. He carried all 3 to the front door. It was raining. The cold, persistent October rain that had been moving in from the coast since the previous evening, turning the yard dark and the lawn soft. The kind of rain that made a front yard look like the wrong place to be. Vanessa held the door. She took the handles of the rolling cases from him and sent them onto the lawn. One, then the other, in separate arcs that left them lying on the wet grass at different angles. She dropped the duffel after them. She crossed her arms. She looked at him with the composed certainty of a woman who had imagined this moment enough times that performing it felt like completion. He stood on the step. He looked at the bags. He looked at the rain coming down steady and even and indifferent to the particulars of this front yard. He did not move. He waited. 3 seconds is a short time. It is also exactly long enough for the sound of an incoming helicopter to travel from the tree line to the front step of a house on Bellevue Avenue, and for a person standing in a doorway to understand that the variable she had not included in her calculation had just arrived. The thrum climbed out of the gray sky, crossed the tree line, and resolved into the shape of the Bell 407 descending into the open ground of the front yard, settling onto the wet grass with the precision of a machine performing a scheduled task. The pilot cutting the main rotor to idle. The Highline Energy Partners logo on the fuselage clear and readable in the rain. Dark blue on white. The same branding as the framed photograph in the home office. The same branding on the board summary still open on the kitchen table. Vanessa came forward from the doorway into the rain. She stood on the front steps and looked at the helicopter, and then at Kendall, and then at the bags between them on the wet lawn, and something moved across her face through several stages that Kendall observed without comment. Confusion first. Then the particular expression of a person revising a calculation in real time, and then something quieter and more final that he did not need to name. He walked to the bags. He loaded them into the helicopter's storage compartment with the ease of a man who had done this before, which he had. He exchanged a nod with the pilot. He turned and looked at the house one final time. The kitchen he had renovated, the floors he had laid. The home office where his grandfather's desk still sat with Clara's photograph on the corner and the aerial view of the south side installation on the wall, and he said nothing. He got in. The rotor climbed. The helicopter lifted clear of the front yard and crossed the tree line and turned southeast toward the coast. He did not look down. Some things did not require a closing statement. They simply lifted and moved forward. and the ground below resolved at last into the correct scale. 10 months later, Kendall Price sat on the back porch of a restored Craftsman house in Richmond's Museum District, a 1930s property he had purchased in January, and spent 4 months rebuilding with a small weekend crew and a contractor friend who had worked 3 of his project sites and understood what patient, precise work looked like. The back porch ran the full length of the house, new boards he had laid himself over 2 weekends in April, the afternoon light coming in from the west at the angle he had hoped for when he first walked the property in the gray of early winter and read the bones of it correctly. He had replaced the roof, rewired the kitchen, rebuilt the chimney from the 6th course up, and refinished the original heart pine floors over a long weekend in March with a floor sander he had borrowed from Bertram and returned with 24 eggs from the farmer's market, because that was the kind of exchange they had always had. The house was smaller than the one on Bellevue Avenue. It was more completely his. A woman named Simone sat in the second porch chair with an engineering assessment report open in her lap, making notes in the margins she had been making all afternoon, which Kendall had come to understand was how she worked through a problem, on paper, in sequence, without rushing the conclusion. She was a civil engineer who specialized in infrastructure project assessment, the kind of work that required understanding what a structure was genuinely capable of before anyone proposed what to build on top of it. They had met at an energy infrastructure conference in Raleigh in March, where she had asked a technical question from the back of the room during his panel with the specificity of someone who had already done the reading. She had come to find him afterward with a follow-up question that was better than the first. She thought carefully before she spoke. She gave her assessments the same way. She had been to this house 6 times and had never once asked him to explain himself, which he had noticed and found restful. The divorce had closed in July. The settlement was clean. Vanessa's attorney had reviewed Schedule A and the 2012 incorporation records and had correctly advised his client that Highline Energy Partners was not accessible under the prenuptial protections. Vanessa had received her share of the liquid marital assets and had relocated to a condominium in Short Pump. Derek Kane's contracting license had been suspended in August following the resolution of 3 client complaints, the original 2 having been joined by a third. He had relocated west of the city. Highline had closed 2 major project sales that spring, a 55-megawatt solar installation in Lunenburg County, and a wind project in the Northern Neck that had been in development for 3 years and sold at a number that had made the quarterly board call run significantly longer than usual, for a reason the board considered acceptable. In September, Kendall had endowed the Clara Price Engineering Fellowship at Virginia Commonwealth University, 4 annual scholarships for undergraduate students in sustainable energy engineering, named for his grandmother, funded in perpetuity from a Highline operating surplus he had set aside for 2 years for exactly this purpose. He had not thought about the Thursday rain often. When he had, it was briefly, a moment that had resolved itself exactly as it should have, nothing more dramatic than that. A variable he had accounted for, a thing that had lifted and moved forward. He pressed the porch board under his boot. Solid, even, true. Simone set her pen down and looked at the yard. The light was going west, long and gold, the kind Richmond got in October for about a week, and then held onto in memory until the following year. He picked up his coffee. He had built everything worth keeping. He was not looking back. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.